The award shows are over and the postseason honors are out. The Sooners and Cowboys, they had some nice hauls, but now both turn their attention toward bringing home some bowl hardware. I'm Mike Sherman, and this is the Bedlam Nation Conversation, sponsored by Dodge. Joining me today are Scott Wright, OSU beat writer, and columnist Jenny Carlson, who's sitting in for Jake Trotter, our OU beat writer. Guys, let's talk Heisman Trophy and sort of wrap that up. Jenny, Sam Bradford won the Heisman in New York last weekend. There have been several Heisman winners who got into the bowl season and sort of gacked it up, didn't do well. Could Bradford be the latest to fall victim to what's called the Heisman jinx?
I suppose it's possible. I mean, I guess it could happen to just about anybody. We saw it happen very close to us when Jason White had a less than stellar performance in the Sugar Bowl a few years ago when he won the Heisman. But the very next year, Matt Leinart won the Heisman and then goes and wins the national championship. I suppose it's possible, but Sam Bradford has been so on the mark this year. He's been so focused, and even though I know that this last week his attention was diverted, you could tell that he was really enjoying the moment and really living in that moment. But I think once he gets back in the film room, once he gets back in the meeting room, I think once he gets back on the field, the attention will turn back to winning the game. You can really tell he wants to win a national championship. So could they lose this game? Sure. He's been so spot on. It's hard to foresee him having just a terrible game in the national championship game.
Scott, is this a case of the hoopla extending a couple more days beyond what's normal for all the other Heisman candidates, and then it extends? There's Sam Bradford ringing the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. There's Sam Monday night at the Heisman banquet, although Tebow, being a former Heisman winner, that was open and available to him too. Is that the case? Just a little bit too much awards banquets, a little too less football?
I don't know that that's so much the case anymore now that they backed that title game up an extra few days, almost a week, January 8th now. So I think that maybe now it's a little bit more. They have a little bit more time to get reacclimated to football and start thinking about that. So we'll see how it goes. We've only been doing this for a couple of years now, so we'll see what kind of impact it has. But I really don't think that if Oklahoma loses the title game, I don't think it'll be because of Sam Bradford.
Oklahoma's only lost to Texas. Sam threw 5 touchdown passes. So, and interestingly, going back to that close Heisman vote, I heard Desmond Howard say on the radio last week that he looked at how each of these 3 finalists performed both in victory and defeat, and a tiebreaker for him was that of the 3 losses, Sam Bradford performed better than all the other 2 in their losses. You buying that?
Well, that was ultimately a big decision maker for me, Scott. I don't know how your ballot came down, but when I was looking at these guys, if you look at raw numbers, if you look at impact on team, I mean, you could really be splitting hairs, forever. You'd have never voted. So when I broke it down, the way I looked at it, Tebow doesn't have a great second half against Mississippi. I didn't think Colt McCoy had a great first half against Texas Tech. Sam Bradford really didn't have even a bad half. I thought against Texas he was pretty solid even in defeat. So I think there's definitely something to be said for that consistent excellence which he's had all year.
Okay, guys, let's move on to OSU and their Heisman candidate, Dez Bryant. Obviously, the Cowboys' best hope for the Heisman this year was Dez. Faded off, including a little bit in big games. He got some votes, though. So the question is he a legitimate candidate going into next season?
It's hard to say. I think that Oklahoma State has a candidate next year. I just don't know that it's Dez. Dez is the guy that makes the Heisman plays, the guy that gets on Sports Center every week and is on top plays and does those kinds of things. But I think if you start looking at who produces and who is really the most important to the team, I think that Kendall Hunter is your guy. Now, whether or not he's the kind of guy that can step into the forefront and be a Heisman candidate and handle the media and all of those kinds of things, he's a pretty quiet guy and doesn't like to get out there and talk. Now, Dez loves to talk, so he'll step out there. He doesn't really care for the media, but he loves to talk when he gets the opportunity. So he's more of a guy that can be a face. Zach Robinson is too, but I don't think that Zach, as a quarterback, is going to put up the kind of numbers that you need to compete with guys like a Tebow or a Bradford in the Heisman.
I love Kendall Hunter. I'll be the first to say I think what happened with the Doak Walker and the finalists there, that was a travesty. He deserved to be in that group of 3. The problem that Kendall Hunter may encounter is that these high-flying offenses in the Big 12, they aren't going anywhere. He is going to have great yards next year, just like he did this year, because he's a great running back. But they're going to be passing it around in this league for the foreseeable future. And I think the attention is so much going to be on that you're just not going to see a guy like Kendall Hunter as a running back get great attention. So it's going to be hard for him to jump up there. And, I still think it's going to be hard for receiver Des Bryant, who I think is also a great talent, to really be a serious Heisman contender anymore. It's become such a quarterback award. You just don't see a lot of wide receivers getting up there.
Before we leave the topic of the Heisman, what did you guys make of Billy Sims' Saturday night explosion on the stage at the Heisman Trophy Awards?
I misunderstood the whole thing. I thought he was just trying to sell some barbecue, so I'm not really sure what that was about. I missed it.
Yeah, obviously it was over the top. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But we all know people that don't have that social switch that turns off at moments when people are thinking, hey, wait a minute, this is a little over the top. I think Billy didn't realize, and he apologized, and I really do think he was sincere in saying, I didn't want to upstage Sam, I didn't want to upstage his big moment, but clearly somebody needs to give him a shot to the ribs if he does that again.
Honestly, though, he really should have realized all that in 2003, because that one was more awkward because of Jason White is standing at the podium when he's hollering that at him, and that was really uncomfortable, I thought, and I think that he should have figured it out then and maybe realized it's time to cut it off.
All right, guys, let's take a break. On the other side, we'll talk about ducks and donors. We're back on the Bedlam Nation conversation, sponsored by Dodge. All right, guys, let's move on to the bowl games. OSU is first up, December 30th in the Holiday Bowl against Oregon. Scott, Oregon's got a great offense, one of the better ones year after year. How do the Ducks match up with the Cowboys' defense?
Well, it'll be a really interesting matchup because statistically these teams are so equal. That's the thing that's going to be really interesting. Another thing is that this is a team that's really kind of on an even plane with Oklahoma State at this point as far as statistics and rankings and things like that. Oklahoma State hasn't really played anybody like that. They've played teams that they're better than, or they've played teams that are in the top 3 in the nation. So this is their first chance this season to play somebody that's kind of on equal footing. So I'll be interested to see how they respond to that. Certainly a chance to prove that they were a team that deserved to be in the top 10 throughout the season. But as far as the matchups, I think that both offenses are going to have the edge. So we'll see which one is able to put more points on the board.
It's interesting. The Cowboys present this problem. They're as good running the ball as they are passing it. And as you said before in other videos and stories, Scott, a statistical dead heat. I mean, almost carbon copies between these two programs. But the Cowboys and every defense have problems facing a very, very balanced offense.
Yeah, and I think Oregon will too. I mean, you saw Oklahoma in the Bedlam game come in there, and while they ended up winning by 20 points, I think defensively, I think they had as much trouble with Oklahoma State and their offense as probably anybody this season. So I think that probably does bode a little bit better for Oklahoma State in this matchup, because I really think Oregon's going to have its hands full defensively. Is OSU? Sure, but OSU's played some teams like this. They've gone against Oklahoma. They've gone against Texas. Obviously, Oklahoma, the ball got rolling a little bit there, but they've slowed some teams down. I like Oklahoma State in this game the more I look at this matchup.
A weak season for the Pac-10. And also a season, though, that the Big 12 has come under some scrutiny for not having very good defenses. So, what kind of statement would a win in this bowl game make for OSU and the Big 12, Scott?
Well, I think it probably depends a little bit on how high scoring this game gets. If it gets out of hand and Oklahoma State wins, I think it just kind of adds fuel to the fire, I guess, for the weakness of Big 12 defenses. But a win against the Pac-10 head up. This is the technically the second best team in the Pac-10, and you're looking at the fourth best team in the Big 12 South. By record. If Oklahoma State's able to win that, I think it definitely makes a big statement for the Big 12.
Okay, changing gears just slightly, the Ducks have become a serious player in the Pac-10 since Phil Knight and his Nike money were shoved into their bank accounts. The question is, how likely is OSU to be able to follow suit in what Oregon has done, Scott?
Well, I certainly think that they're on the right track at this point. They're, a lot of times with teams like if you look at Oregon's recent history, it comes down to having the type of players that bump you up to that elite level, whether it's Joey Harrington or Dennis Dixon, guys that got Oregon into the national title hunt in those seasons. But the thing that Phil Knight's money has done is it's raised them to where they're always in kind of in this range, where a 9-3 season is kind of just an average year, and that's what Oklahoma State wants to get to. I mean, obviously you want to get to the elite level where you're always in the top 10, but if you can use this and propel yourself to the point where 9-3 isn't just a big deal like it has been this year, that's a good thing for this team.
It's getting to be a few years, but Oregon plays Penn State in the Rose Bowl, Joey Harrington years, and now is next year possibly that year for Oklahoma State? Almost everybody back, everybody important that's back, and then all of the tough games, or a lot of them anyway, except for OU, are in Stillwater, Jenny.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely could be. And the way the Big 12 South is setting up, you not only have Oklahoma State with so many returning guys. Now clearly they'll have some losses. Defensive line is an area that I think, Scott, you've talked about a lot. That has got to be an area that they look to shore up. But, they're going to have offensively just about everybody back, lose some offensive linemen, but a great returning cast on the offense. And then if you start to think about the other Big 12 South teams, what does Oklahoma have coming back? Is Sam Bradford going to be there? What are they going to have offensively? Texas, what do they look like? They're probably a little bit more set in what they might bring back. Texas Tech will be without Graham Harrell. And Michael Crabtree is a possible bolt to the NFL. So could the South open up to give them a shot to then emerge? I think it's entirely possible. Oklahoma State's going to have a nice cast of returning guys next year. And in the South, as we well know, anything can happen.
In the Oklahomans coverage leading up to the Holiday Bowl, December 30th, Scott Wright's going to be talking about a lot of these issues, including examining the impact and the focus on the Big Donor Bowl. We're going to take another break, and when we get back, we'll look at the impact of DeMarco Murray's injury on the Sooners. We're back on the Bedlam Nation conversation, sponsored by Dodge. Let's turn our eye toward the national championship game. News this week out of Norman is that OU running back DeMarco Murray had surgery and will miss the game. Jenny, what impact is that going to have on the Sooners as they face Florida in the BCS title game?
Well, I think it can't hurt. I think it can't but have some sort of impact. You don't lose a starting player like DeMarco Murray, who's a really good running back, and think that there's going to be no impact. But the good news is that they're losing a guy at a position that they're very deep in with Chris Brown, Moses Madu. And I think Barry Trammell wrote today in the newspaper, Barry wrote about maybe losing DeMarco. His biggest impact is going to be catching the ball out of the backfield. He's been a great weapon out of the backfield catching the ball. So I think about the biggest concern that you're looking at there is, if they decide that Madu is a good option to catch it out of the backfield, do you start to tip off Florida? And they're thinking, well, Chris Brown, if he's in there, he's going to run it. If Madu's in there, he's going to maybe catch it. You got to kind of guard against some of that. You don't lose a guy like DeMarco Murray and have no impact, but I do think that they've got capable backups. Chris Brown's been running great. Madu's been running great. I think that's a position where it might not have as big an impact as some other positions on the field for them.
Scott, the Sooners had last year that three-headed backfield, Alan Patrick, Chris Brown, and DeMarco Murray. Now this year it's down to a two-man set, but Moses Madu really has been a revelation this year. He got a little run last year, but heck, they scored 61 points on Missouri without DeMarco Murray, and Madu looked fabulous.
Yeah, he did. He played really well in that Big 12 title game, and I'm sure that the adrenaline was pumping whenever he, on the first play, sees that all of a sudden he's going to get a shot. So we'll see how he handles a month worth of build up to this huge game. But I think that he's a kid that can handle that. He's a little bit out of the same mold as Murray. So he's a shifty guy. He can line up in the slot, and they can do some things with him there to kind of confuse some defenses. So I think that he'll be a good weapon in the bowl game.
A couple things. I saw an ESPN analyst say that look out for Ryan Broyles to somehow take up the slack for Murray. Whether that means even handing him the ball off a little bit out of the backfield, that would be an interesting wrinkle. Also interesting about that is Madu and Ryan Broyles, two graduates of Norman High. And boy, looking at these guys, it's a wonder Norman High wasn't a lot better when they were there. Speaking of Big 12 defenses, though, Florida quarterback Tim Tebow has already made it known that he is just licking his chops at the prospect of facing a Big 12 defense. What do you guys make of that?
Well, I don't know if he should be licking his chops as much as he says. The numbers are so hard to judge this year. When you look at the offenses that a majority of these Big 12, especially South teams, are playing, there's just so many opportunities that those offenses generate. It's really hard to get a shutout. A shutout, what the heck is that? In the Big 12 anymore? That's just not possible. In the SEC, it's much more power game. I mean, Florida's really kind of the team out there that's doing something a little bit different with running and passing the ball, and then Tebow, who's able to do both. It's a lot more elementary, if you will, for defenses in the SEC to be able to stop people. Are they good in the SEC? Absolutely. But I don't think just because the Big 12 defenses statistically are down the chart means that they're not any good.
One interesting matchup, I think, out of all of this will be whenever Tebow takes off to run, because if you look at Oklahoma's linebackers, they don't really compare with what a lot of these SEC linebackers are stature-wise. They don't have the big guys that Tebow is used to seeing when he gets past the line of scrimmage. So that'll be the interesting challenge for Austin Box and Travis Lewis and those guys to come up and kind of play big whenever Tebow's taken off.
Scott, is that where Nick Harris comes in? Nick Harris, a big safety, a fast runner, and a good open field tackler?
Yeah, it'll be a really important game for him. I'm sure you'll see him up near the line of scrimmage a lot. Probably they might even have him playing sort of that weak side linebacker role that he does every now and then anyway. So yeah, he'll be very important in this. Keenan Clayton with his open field tackling as well. So you've got to see those guys come up and make hits and make tackles especially when Tebow's running the ball.
Okay, Dan Mullen, the Florida offensive coordinator, he's going to be calling plays for the Gators, but he's going to have his mind in Starksville, Mississippi. He's been named the new coach at Mississippi State. What impact is that going to have on the Gators?
I mean, it could have a substantial one. It's really hard to know. We've seen, watching Oklahoma over the years, we've seen this scenario play out a couple times. Florida offensive coordinator Mark Richt in 2000 had been named the Georgia head coach. He goes ahead and calls plays for Florida State. They don't score an offensive touchdown in that game.
And still wouldn't if they were playing today.
Exactly, and Chris Winkie would be 85 by now. But so we saw that in 2000. And then you saw Mike Stoops get the Arizona job before the Sugar Bowl against LSU in 2003. And he wasn't calling plays, but he was still on the sideline, which was a little bit of an interesting thing, I thought. So it's hard to know. I mean, I think if you're going to do it, you have to go all in and just go as if, everything's okay. But how do you know if this guy's, is he going home at night and making calls for Mississippi State? You assume he probably is.
He better be.
Yeah, exactly. So, how it plays out, I don't know. But I think he is going to have his mind in two places, and that can't but divert a little bit of attention from Florida National Championship game.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue because this guy, recruiting gets to take a little bit of a backseat because you've got a dead period coming up, and so you can't be making any calls for that anyway. But he's still trying to put a coaching staff together. He's still thinking about guys and reading resumes and trying to get things lined up for when recruiting does kick back in. There's a lot of stuff that can pull his attention away, and you're seeing right now with Oklahoma State trying to replace Tim Beckman. You've got a coaching staff that's trying to emulate what he did for 12 games, and you've lost that centerpiece that was the guy that was making the calls and organizing everything in practice and all of those things. And with whenever you're dealing with that, you've kind of pulled out a part of the personality of that unit. Now he's going to try to stay in there, and Dan Mullen is, and make things be the same. But it's going to be really tough to make everything exactly the same whenever you're being torn the way that he is.
Thanks, guys. That's all for the Bedlam Nation Conversation, sponsored by Dodge. To continue the conversation, please go to bedlamnation.com and keep it going. It's the place to be for OU and OSU fans. And then you can follow the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the new look Oklahoman.